The 610th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Wednesday night. About 24 hours or so since Carolina improved to 3-0 with a win over Radford. And we're here to talk about that win from last night. We'll take a look at the box score. You'll hear from head coach Hubert Davis. We'll give our stat of the game before we get into our main thoughts and discussion topic from last night's game. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Carolina, as I mentioned, beat Radford 89-74. They improved to 3-0 on the young season, and Carolina won the game despite shooting just 38% from the field, 26% from three, and they were just 31 of 49 from the foul line, which equates to just 63% shooting. So, Carolina scored 89 points, but on a better shooting night, they could have scored anywhere north of 110, let alone had they made their free throws. Caleb Wilson was the engine that somewhat powered Carolina to this win. He recorded his first double-double as a Tar Heel with 13 points and 14 rebounds. Luka Bogava made his first start in place for the injured Seth Trimble, led Carolina in scoring 19 points, but handed out a team best 5 assists in the win as well. And so when you look at this game top to bottom, 15 years ago, young Josh would have watched this game and would have complained and would have been upset at the way Carolina played, the lack of execution at the foul line, the lack of shooting that Carolina put on display last night. But I think there was so much value in the way that Carolina won because they saw a different defense that they got to prepare for. That'll be beneficial as the season moves along, and they can take confidence knowing, hey, we're still good enough to win games when the ball's not going through the hoop. And that's what good teams do. Good teams find other ways to win when they're not shooting the ball the way they want to shoot the ball. And one thing that I think we can take that we know about this group, no matter how bad they're playing on offense, it's not going to impact the way they're playing defensively. That was on display last night. Carolina led 22-21 with 8 minutes and 10 seconds left to go in the first half. and allow just one field goal over the final 8 minutes of play to build a 44-31 lead, and really from there never looked back. So it wasn't a pretty win. There was a lot of uneven play at times, but one that Carolina could be happy about and understand they can build and improve off of that going into Friday's game against North Carolina Central.
Yeah, those are the best types of wins that you can get, or games where you don't necessarily look great and you can build off of them, but you still end up winning the game by double digits. That's the thing that I think is important for Carolina fans to realize, is that, this could have certainly been a lot worse. You could have been locked in a tight game. I mean, you look at some of the other games around the country, at halftime of their game against Delaware, BYU was trailing. But they found a way to pull away late in that game. But it could have been, much worse for Carolina. This was not what we saw last year against Elon. And the thing that I would tell people that look at this final score and say it's not a big enough margin for Carolina. Well, first of all, they were up by 20-plus points for the majority of the second half. They were more than comfortable in that area. It was just, Radford made some shots down the stretch when Carolina had sort of taken their foot off the gas just a little bit. And the other thing is that the last time that Carolina played them, they won by 16. That year, what did Carolina go on to do? They were a team that won the ACC regular season title and were a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So I don't think that necessarily means that Carolina is going to struggle the rest of the year. Radford is a pretty good team. I have to tell you, with the NC State transfer, Dennis Parker Jr., the Clemson transfer, Del Jones, this is a legitimate team that I think has a chance to make some noise in the Big South Conference this year. For Carolina, it's just, there are some things that you definitely have to clean up. There's no doubt about that. Caleb Wilson had his worst game as a Tar Heel so far. He was just 4 of 13 from the field, but he still had a double-double and looked really, really good at times during this game. So, I think there's a lot of positives to take away from this for Carolina. We'll talk about them here coming up, and there's some other guys that I think deserve to be pointed out too, that we might not necessarily talk about nearly as in depth, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. But I just thought overall, Carolina, in what was a clunky game, just a weird overall game where there were a ton of fouls called. 55 fouls called between the two teams. That is so rare to see that, and Carolina ends up surviving that and doing so by double digits. I think everybody should calm down and relax and be confident that this team, based off of what they showed against Kansas, is going to be perfectly fine.
Yeah, no, I think they're still calling fouls, and I think West Durham is still broadcasting from the Smith Center, because I've never seen a game that tightly officiated between an ACC school and a school from the Big South. We did not talk enough about going into the game about Radford having 2 ACC transfers in their backcourt. Both those guys played a big part in why they were as competitive as they were in the first half, and just why they were as pesky as they were overall. But that's life with college basketball and in the current climate of the transfer portal, where you as much as you see teams going down to the group of 5 level to add talent, you see, or the mid-major level for college basketball, you see mid-majors going to get, power conference talent that's not good enough to play on a consistent basis. And it's why I don't believe when we get to the tournament that Cinderella is going to be dead. I still think you'll see the upsets that make college basketball the unique sport that it is. And, that they were picked to finish, I think, 4th this year in the Big South. And I would not be surprised if they finish better than that this season. And so, there was a lot to really take away from last night. We'll do so by taking a look at the box score. It's not a pretty one, but it's a winning box score for Carolina. As I mentioned, they shoot 38% from the field. They were 25 of 65. They held Radford, though, to 34% shooting. The Highlanders were just 24 of 70 from the field. Both teams struggled from behind the three-point line. Carolina, 8 of 31, 26%. Radford, just 7 of 30. That's an even worse 23%. They both left tons of points at the foul line. Carolina 31 of 49 from the stripe. That's 63%. Radford was 19 of 31. That equates to 61%. Both teams committed 11 turnovers, with Radford scoring 12 points off of Carolina's turnovers. Carolina scored 11 points off of the 11 Radford turnovers. The Heels were dominant on the glass, as you could expect, 55 to 43. They won the defensive battle 37-29, and the offensive glass 18 to 14. Second chance points in favor of Carolina 17 to 10. Bench points in favor of Carolina 21 to 14. Both teams scored 30 points in the paint. Carolina with just 11 points in the fast break, 8 points for Radford. Carolina 4 blocks against 3 for the opponent. Both teams had 7 steals, and the Heels had 15 assists on their 25 made baskets. Radford just 6 assists on their 24 made baskets. The game was tied 5 times. There was 5 different lead changes, but all in all, Carolina led for a whopping 33 minutes and 47 seconds. When I'll get to the quote of the game, we'll hear from head coach Hubert Davis, and this will really kind of set the first talking point from the game. Obviously, it's the first time Carolina played without Seth Trimble. They moved Luka Bogava into the starting lineup, something that I think paid dividends for Carolina in more ways than one. But one of the things we talked about going into the game was to find answers at that 2-guard spot and start to build legitimate depth up and down the roster in your backcourt. And Hubert Davis spoke about how they took a step in the right direction in last night's win.
One of the things I always say is, I don't know when, where, how, and the manner in which you're going to get an opportunity, but when it happens, your job and responsibility is to be ready when your number is called. And it's obviously we're sad that Seth is not able to play right now, but it is a wonderful opportunity for a number of guys that'll get extended minutes and help us with our depth moving forward. I think it's very valuable.
All right, so there's Hubert Davis talking about, them trying to build legitimate depth at that 2-guard spot until Seth Trimble does come back. Jeff Goodman from the Field of 68 on 3 did report yesterday that it was a broken arm, was kind of just a freak accident in the weight room. The good news is that it was a clean break, which should allow him to return even quicker. Trimble's already talking about being back ahead of schedule, and so we expect to be without him for the remainder of the non-conference season. Trimble more optimistic that he could be back maybe by the middle of December. But, with that, Carolina did move Luka into the starting lineup, something we talked about a lot in the preview. And look, it was an uneven night for him. He did score 19 points, was just 7 of 18 from the field, including 3 of 11 from behind the 3-point line. But he did finish 3 for 6 after an 0 for 5 start. But he did hand out 5 assists in his 31 minutes. You saw the Luka that Carolina was envisioning adding to the roster in the second half, where he just committed to get to the rim and really play inside the 3-point line, where he could either live in the mid-range as a scorer or distribute the ball as a passer. Behind him, though, you really got some uneven play at different times. Derek Dixon, played 17 minutes and scored 7 points. Jaden Young played 10 minutes, scored 2 points, and committed 3 turnovers. And Jonathan Powell was maybe the best guy off the bench when he did play some at that 2-guard spot. He scored 8 points in 22 minutes off the bench. When you look at the depth that Carolina is trying to build in the absence now of Seth Trimble, do you believe they've got the right guys to build legitimate depth coming off the bench? Because we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Jones Angel did highlight some concern about the lack of bench production, even though the bench did score 21 points, but it did not always look pretty for guys like Derek Dixon, guys like Jaden Young playing at that 2-guard spot in place of the injured Seth Trimble.
Yeah, I think that you just learned that Jaden Young isn't necessarily a player that's going to be able to give you a ton there this season. I think that was something that, maybe we didn't know coming into the season because of how much volume he put on tape last year at Virginia Tech. He was a guy that, came over and we were expecting with less of a role that he would be able to be a little bit more efficient. 1 of 6 certainly isn't going to cut it. But this could just be an off night for him. I mean, same thing with Derek Dixon. He's still young. I think for him, the thing that you really like is that even though he was just 1 of 5 from the field, just 1 of 4 from beyond the arc, he was 4 of 6 from the foul line. He did get there. The fourth most out of anybody on the team. And the thing that you really liked from him was that rebounding wise, he was as active as just about anybody off that bench was for the majority of the night. He had 5 rebounds, all of them defensive for Carolina. So, I mean, yeah, for him, it's a little bit more understandable because he is a freshman. For Jaden Young, I think maybe it just tells you that he isn't necessarily ready to be able to contribute at Carolina just yet. And then Jonathan Powell, I thought was fine. I thought did what he had to do, 8 points on 3 of 6 from the field, 2 of 4 from beyond the arc. Had a couple of nice drives to the basket that just didn't go in for him. But I do think that he is a guy that, is still going to be a little bit limited in terms of the amount of production that he's going to be able to give you off the bench. Now, 8, I mean, that's if you're asking for a lot more than that, I don't really know what to tell you. You're hoping that your starting lineup is going to give you the type of production that you need, where you don't need a guy to come in off the bench. And I get it in 22 minutes, but you don't need him to come in and score, 12, 14 points, something like that. You're looking for other guys on this team to step up now that, that are in the starting lineup, now that you don't have Seth Trimble. So, I mean, yeah, I think overall, looking at the position, I still think Carolina's in a pretty good spot. I think, we'll talk more about what Luka did here coming up here. But I think, he did everything that he needed to do in the second half to help Carolina pull away. He got some help from guys like Jonathan Powell in that second half, along with Derek Dixon. So, I think that spot is going to be perfectly fine for the time being against the type of opponents that Carolina is going up against. It'll be a lot more interesting when we get to Fort Myers and we start talking about matchups with St. Bonaventure and then eventually Michigan State, whether or not this position is going to be able to hold up.
The most noticeable thing I saw last night with that position without Seth Trimble is there is a lack of explosiveness at that 2-guard spot. Carolina's not as quick. They're not as dynamic. They're not as athletic. Now, they can overcome that, but I do think that's something that they're sorely going to miss in his absence, just because Derek Dixon, if he's going to play off the ball, is not an explosive guard. He's much more of a Marcus Page type where, kind of plays more to the floor. Luka Bogava doesn't have a lot of explosive in his game, just, is more of a savvy player, which there's nothing wrong with that. The Carolina system does require that, but you are missing some of that without Seth Trimble, and they'll have to navigate that over the next month and a half or so. You take a look at the stat of the game. I went free throw shooting. Carolina just 31 of 49 from the foul line, just 63%. And meanwhile, Radford was 19 of 31. So Carolina had as many makes as, Radford had attempts. But there's a twofold to this situation. One, Carolina can't miss 18 free throws, and I wouldn't expect them to moving forward. But it was like pulling teeth to get them to make back-to-back free throws on any given possession, whether it was in the bonus, the double bonus, or just a flat-out shooting foul. They've done a really good job in the first 3 games because they're so big, getting the opponent in foul trouble and getting to the foul line early and often, getting to the bonus, usually by the under 12 timeout in each half. That's a great thing because the most efficient play in basketball is the free throw because you're scoring while the clock is stopped. But you got to make them. You can't go there and leave as many empty possessions as Carolina did at different times last night, or else you subject yourself to get beat. On the flip side, and I know the game was called tightly, there's not an excuse, there's not an explanation to put a Big South opponent on the free throw line 31 times in your home gym. There's just not. And so Carolina's got to do a much better job of defending without fouling here moving forward. So I love that they're getting to the foul line as often as they are. They need to convert on them, but on the flip side, they got to do a much better job as well as defending without fouling, something that we've seen show up in the first 3 games where they do get foul happy at times and commit a lot of fouls in a short manner.
Yeah, their aggression, I think, is ultimately what leads to that. They're trying to be a little too aggressive going after the ball, and it results in some of these fouls. I mean, Caleb Wilson had multiple moments like that. 2 of his 3 fouls were fouls that you just say to yourself, what are you doing? Why did you need to do that there? But at the same time, I mean, it's a weird balance, right? Because if you say, hey, we don't want you to be that aggressive, well, then you might back it off a little bit too much. So you need to find that happy medium for these guys on the floor because, yeah, you need to know how valuable you are. I mean, in the first half, you get Caleb Wilson in foul trouble. You get Kyan Evans in foul trouble. And that's a disaster scenario, especially the last part of that, because then you have, Derek Dixon having to play extensive minutes for you. You've already, become shorthanded in the backcourt because you don't have Seth Trimble. So that's what I think really, in this game sort of made this game a little odd, was that there were, some certain fouls that led to guys having to come out of the game. And you had lineups that you're not going to see play probably the rest of the year together on the floor. So, I mean, that's one of the main things that Carolina's got to avoid on the defensive end is just don't take those silly fouls. Don't end up giving the opponent an advantage in the game because you have to come out and sit on the sidelines. In the case of Caleb Wilson, you're the most valuable player on this team. You can look at some of the other guys and talk about how valuable they are for Carolina. I mean, Seth Trimble is certainly a very valuable player, and we're learning just how valuable he is. But nobody matters more to Carolina's success, it feels like, this season than Caleb Wilson. You can't have him getting into foul trouble the way that he did in that first half. Now, credit to him, second half, much better, much more disciplined, and he'll learn. He's a freshman, so it does take a little bit of time to learn these things. But I definitely think that's something that they're going to be honing in on and focusing on. And then when it comes to the free throws, I mean, yeah, every single person that stepped up to the line, except for Kyan Evans, missed a free throw in this game. And that includes guys that are really good shooters. Jonathan Powell went 0 for 2 at the foul stripe. We think he's one of the best shooters on this team. There were a lot of missed free throws from Caleb Wilson. That's an area he's got to work on. Henry Vasar. We thought, with Carolina getting a guy that can shoot it from beyond the arc, he'd be a guy that's pretty efficient from the foul line as well. And in his time at Arizona, he was relatively efficient from the foul stripe, but he goes 7 of 11. It just felt like there were so many misses. It was almost comical at one point where, yeah, you would say, okay, Carolina made the first. Well, there's no way they're making the second. And sure enough, it would turn out that they wouldn't make the second. You've got to take advantage of those opportunities there. And I get it. You're not going to make every foul shot. But if you made half of the ones that you missed, this game isn't even remotely close. So I think that's the message that Carolina is probably being told today. This team is being told today by the coaching staff is, look, if you clean up these certain areas, this game really isn't that close. And there's no conversation about, should Carolina have really been struggling in this game? It's just Carolina, they had an off night shooting from the field, but hey, they went to the foul stripe and took care of business, and that's why they walked out of here with a big win. So I think that's probably what Hubert Davis and his staff should be telling those guys in there. And hopefully that's an area that they'll be working on moving forward, because it wasn't just this game where we've seen some of those foul shooting issues. We've seen that here throughout the start of the season, and it needs to be better by the time that you get to some of these bigger matchups later on in non-conference and when you get to conference play.
All right, let's get to our more in-depth thoughts and takeaways from this game. And we'll talk about Luka Bogava in his first UNC start. And look, he overcame a poor shooting night. I thought the best thing that he did, and Dennis Scott brought this up on the broadcast, was after, settling for so many, contested and uncontested threes, just finally put the ball on the floor and started attacking. And he drew a foul, got to the foul line, ironically enough, saw the ball go through the basket, and then from there really just picked up his confidence. It's the oldest cliche maybe in basketball for when a shooter is struggling. The best way to get your confidence and your rhythm back is to get to the foul line. But it was very apropos for him because, you know, he went on to finish with 19 points, with 7 of 18 from the field, and you know, it was 3 of 11 from three. So that means he was, you know, 4 of 7 from inside the 3-point line. Was a lot more efficient. You know, you could see him getting to the basket. You saw some mid-range jump shots as well, and you saw that 3-level score that we talked about so much in the offseason. His biggest contribution was his playmaking ability and his ability to knife in and out of the defense and throw lob passes for Caleb Wilson to dunk, maybe Henry Visar to get a layup. And once the defense started collapsing, he did a really good job of finding the open teammates for either, you know, uncontested threes or just wide open driving lanes to the rim. And it really got me thinking about this because Kyan Evans, not the best scoring night last night, just 3 points for Carolina, did though lead the Heels in plus minus if you're someone that subscribes to that stat. Could his playmaking ability maybe allow him to become Carolina's main ball handler in the half court and have Kyan Evans play off of him? And Evans just become a guy that catch and shoots, catch and drives, so on and so forth, as opposed to having to get the offense set and run whatever kind of action Carolina's wanting to get into. Because I love Kyan Evans in the open court. I think he's really good in transition, pushing the ball ahead, getting, you know, the ball across the timeline in a timely manner. He's always looking to pass and not dribble, which is the best way to be as a guard. But he can't do what Luka can do in the half court. And I just wonder, maybe, just maybe, if there's enough there for them to be a little subtle switch to where you open up Evans just to be more as a catch and shoot guy on the outside and let Luka be the guy that's, you know, creating for himself and for others with his ability to get to his spots, draw defenders, and then pass out of double teams.
I mean, it could happen. You know, I think the thing that most people are going to be concerned about is the fact that he doesn't really have the speed that you see from a Kyan Evans. But as you mentioned, he's a guy that can sort of creatively get his way to the basket. And we saw that at multiple times last night. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, that could be some way that, you know, the offense ends up setting up a little bit better in the half court, and that's certainly something that they can experiment with. But I think Kyan Evans is perfectly fine at setting everything up. I mean, we saw it in the second half of the game against Kansas, how successful he was at setting the table for everybody in the half court. So I think either way, you've got two guys that can handle the ball, that can set up the offense, and at times set it up for success. Last night wasn't necessarily that time for Kyan Evans, but I think that Luka Bogava did a good job of picking him up. I mean, you go back, really, it was a story of two halves. The first half, you know, Luka wasn't shooting the ball very well, just 2 of 8, was still the most aggressive out of everybody for Carolina in terms of number of shots in the first half. But at the same time, he knew when he had to get to the basket and get some of those passes off to his teammates. And so he finishes with 4 assists in the first half. He had a beautiful play where he just lobs the ball up to Henry Visar. I don't remember if it resulted in a basket or him just getting to the line, but he throws it over a defender. It almost looked like a lay-in, the way that he lobs it over the defender and perfectly drops it to Henry Visar. It's a play that you don't see a lot of guys make because he was up in the air as well. It looked like he was going up for a reverse lay-in, and ends up, you know, somehow passing the ball out of that spot, and getting it to Henry Visar for a successful trip down the floor for Carolina. So, I mean, yeah, I think some of the things that you saw him be able to do passing-wise with the basketball, I think really show you just how special of a player he can be. And then you go to the second half, that's when he starts taking over as a scoring threat. 5 of 10 from the field, still, tied with Caleb Wilson for the most shots in that second half. 12 points, 2 of 5 from beyond the arc. That's when he really started to find his legs a little bit. And I think, as the year goes along here, you'll see him start to become more comfortable. You'll see that efficiency start to go up. But yeah, that passing ability is just something that you can't necessarily teach. And he looks like a pro out there. He looks like a guy that has been at the pro level, that has done it, especially on that end of the floor. Defensively, there are some times where he looks a little slow. He can get beat by some quicker guys. So that's certainly something that Carolina is going to have to account for. But there's no doubt that Luka at times last night, and especially in that second half, there were times where he was the best player on the floor for Carolina. And that was what we were looking for from him when we told him, we need you to step up in this game without Seth Trimble.
You mentioned being the best player on the floor. That was Henry Visar, I thought, at different times for Carolina last night.
Mm-hmm.
He was the engine in the first half for Carolina, where he scored 11 points, was 4 of 6 from the field, was just 3 of 6 from the foul line. But he played, 19 minutes, only came out for, I think it was 14 seconds, which is going to lead us to a discussion probably when we preview the North Carolina Central game. Carolina is lacking legitimate depth at that 5 spot, but also I think he's just been so daggum impactful. How can you take him off the court when he's, I think, 1, conditioned enough to play the minutes that he's playing, and 2, he's staying out of foul trouble, having to rely as much on Zayden Hyde, James Brown, and others. But how about last night? It was 18 points, 5 of 7 shooting, 7 of 11 from the line, 7 rebounds in 28 minutes. And it's different. It's really unlike anything we've ever seen from a Carolina big man. If we're being honest, our good buddy Myron Goodman sent me a message today, said that he sees a lot of Tyler Zeller in him, but Tyler Zeller had a much more defined back to the basket game, was more of a mid-range big man because he lived that 16 to 18 footer territory. He also ran the floor as well as any Carolina big that I've seen in my lifetime. Visar doesn't do that. He doesn't run the floor great. He doesn't have a great back to the basket game. He doesn't have a mid-range game. He's going to be more comfortable standing out in the perimeter shooting threes. But he's just effective, man. There's a workman-like attitude to him where he just everything he gets, he earns. And I'm not saying that he's not gifted, but he just plays so hard. There's just a relentless energy, effort, and a motor to him that it's really hard to contain him. And through these first 3 games, I think he's really validated Carolina's staff and over recruiting Van Allen Lubin, and making him the primary big. And look, we know where Van Allen Lubin is now. We know how we feel about where he is and what his head coach has had to say about Carolina letting him go out the door. But for as well as Van Allen Lubin played down the stretch a year ago, through these first 3 games, there hasn't been a moment in time where I looked at Carolina and said, gosh knows I really miss Van Allen Lubin. It's nice having a big man that sets effective screens. It's nice having a big man that can catch bounce passes on the pick and roll and finish through contact. It's nice having a big man that demands you to respect his 3-point ability, which is stretching the defense and creating driving lanes, one for himself. His ability to put the ball on the floor and drive right by his opponent is really fun to watch. He's got a couple of dunks already this season where he's driven right by the defense and been able to flush it home, but he's making the game easier for everybody else. And, we kind of heard, Hubert Davis Corp after the Kansas win. He said some things in the locker room before the game that he wasn't going to repeat. There's an edge to this guy that I think you really got to appreciate. And so, last night I thought he was maybe the best player on the floor. And he really steadied the ship for Carolina on a night where they simply weren't at their best.
Yeah, I mean, the first half, he was the best guy on the floor. There's no doubt about it. I mean, 11 points, 4 of 6 from the field, 3 of 6 from the foul line. I mean, yeah, it wasn't the most efficient night from the foul line, but he was at least getting there. He was doing everything that he needed to be able to get there. And that's even with just 2 rebounds. I mean, not the guy that was leading Carolina on the glass in the first half, but still a guy that was doing everything else that you needed to do. And I love the way that he runs the floor. I think that is one thing that Carolina was lacking last year. I mean, you say that there's never been a moment that you've said that you are missing Vin Allen Lubin. I mean, I'm saying to myself, thank God Vin Allen Lubin is on this team. Because if he was on this team this year and he was the guy that was starting at the 5 spot instead of Henry Vasar, I don't know where Carolina would be. I don't think that they, in that game against Kansas, I don't know if he does what you need to do to be able to necessarily win that game, because there were moments in that game. You go back to that first half. Caleb Wilson, when he comes off the floor at a point, who's out there that can score the ball for Carolina? We asked that question and we said, this lineup, is there somebody that really can score it? And who was the guy that was stepping up? It was Henry Vasar. He did it again in this game where in that first half, Caleb Wilson ends up having to come out, plays just 8 minutes due to foul trouble. Well, who is the guy that we can turn to? Oh, we've got this big man from Estonia that has been at it for a couple of years now is finally getting his opportunity and really seems to be capitalizing on it. You're right. It's a kind of a weird game of how he's able to score the basketball, because it's not like he's just a dominant back to the basket type of guy. It's not like he's a guy that's just standing out beyond the 3-point line and knocking down 3 after 3, and that's how he's stretching the floor. Very similar to a guy like Victor Locken, for example, for last year from Clemson in the game that Carolina played against them, where he just went off from beyond the arc. But he's the guy that, can put the ball on the floor a little bit, get to the basket. He's going to scrap for some of those offensive rebounds and end up finishing inside for Carolina. I mean, we saw multiple times in the second half where Carolina, needs a rebound from him and they end up getting it. I mean, he does everything that you need him to be able to do out on the floor. And then, you have the moment in the second half or the moments in the second half where he doesn't necessarily have to be nearly as involved. Luka starts playing well. You get 8 points from Jaren Stevenson. Caleb Wilson starts scoring the ball a little bit. He takes just 1 field goal attempt in the second half, but that's not a guy that's going to complain that I'm not getting the ball. And I mean, he still finished with 7 points, but what did he do there? That's when he turned up the rebounding. So I like everything that I see from him. I think you're right. He is very unique. I don't know if we've seen a big man quite like him. I thought, especially after that second half against Kansas, I said to myself, there is a little Bryce Johnson to him in the way that he plays in terms of, finishing strong inside with a lot of dunks, a guy that brings just relentless energy to the floor, and a guy that's going to let you know about it as well, especially when he's playing well. So that would be the guy that I would sort of compare his attitude to and maybe his ability to finish at the rim to. But other than that, I mean, I don't know that there's a guy that's been able to do some of the stuff that he's been able to do for Carolina, at least not in our lifetime. Maybe there was a big man back in Dean Smith's era that was able to do that, that we didn't get to see. But he is a very unique big man, and he is one that I think is really helping Carolina out to start this season. I mean, you look at it, he is probably Carolina's second best player. Behind Caleb Wilson, I think he is the guy that so far through the first 3 games has consistently been there for Carolina when they've needed him to be there. So credit to Henry. He is off to a really strong start.
Let's get to one other takeaway before we get into our discussion topic here. We're live on a Wednesday night, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're talking about Carolina's 89-74 win over the Radford Highlanders last night in Chapel Hill. And this one's a negative, but I can still spin it positive. The perimeter shooting woes continue. Carolina last night, just 8 of 31 from behind the 3-point line. That works out to 26%. And look, Vasar was 1 for 1. Jared Stevenson was 1 for 5. Luka Bogava 3 for 11. Zayden High 0 for 1. Derek Dixon 1 for 4. Jaden Young 0 for 3. Isaiah Dennis 0 for 1. Jonathan Powell was 2 for 4. At some point, Carolina's going to shoot the ball better, or we'll just have to simply label them as a bad shooting team. I think 3 games is still too early to do that, but the way that it's trending is we're trending more in that direction than them being a quality shooting bunch. The one thing that I'll still stress, and it was the biggest thing I took away from last night, was they're still getting quality looks. They're getting makeable looks. There were a lot of uncontested threes that they got last night, which, okay, you can raise an eyebrow and say, well, don't they need to make those? Yes, they do. Absolutely. You got to be tough enough to make that. You got to be good enough to make that. That's why you're getting paid. You're getting paid for a lot of these guys to shoot the three ball and shoot it very well. But Carolina wasn't generating those looks a year ago. And that's the most important thing, is that they're running such crisp action, and the ball movement is at a level right now that we haven't seen since at least 2 years ago. That, they're still generating quality looks. That if these are the looks they generate over the long haul of the season, I do believe they will shoot a better percentage. Carolina shot in the high 20s, low 30s last year because they took a lot of guarded threes. They took a lot of contested threes. And you got to have guys that can make contested shots. Like, you got to have tough shot makers. You got to have guys that, their offense can beat their defense. I do think Carolina has that. But Carolina wasn't missing open threes a year ago, the way that they're doing right now. I still think some of this is trying to figure out who's going to play with who and just try to get comfortable being on the floor and picking your spots on when and where to attack. But that number, while it's disconcerting, if you really look at the offense and the shot generation that Carolina is getting, I still like the shot Carolina is generating. And that's not something I was saying this time a year ago, where it was very evident after the first week or so of the season that team was going to struggle to get quality looks from behind the three-point line.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right that this team is getting really good looks from beyond the arc. I mean, they did last night, and they just weren't falling. I mean, I said it to you while we were watching that first half about Luka. I thought almost every look from the outside, I never said to myself, man, I don't really understand taking this shot here. And it just wasn't going down for him. Jonathan Powell, I think, knocking down 2 threes in that first half looked like he was in rhythm, but then in the second half, unable to knock down either one of his attempts from behind the three-point line. So, I mean, yeah, for this team right now, they're just not falling. I thought Jaren Stevenson, good looks in the second half. That's another guy that I think as the season goes along will hopefully get on track from beyond the three-point line for Carolina. But, the thing is if you're going to continue to score the ball inside the way that you have to start the season with Caleb Wilson, with Henry Vesar, it gives you a little bit of a margin for error from the perimeter. And it means that it can take a little bit of time for it to come along. But at some point, you are going to have to be able to shoot the ball from the outside in order to win some games. And we saw it against Kansas. First half, Carolina can't really hit anything from beyond the arc. Now, that was a completely different type of game than this game. I thought in the first half against Kansas, there were a lot of really tough looks that Carolina had to take because they simply could not free themselves up in the half court. I thought in this game, they were able to free themselves up. It's just that the shots weren't falling. So we'll follow this trend as it goes throughout the rest of non-conference play. This is the thing that, this non-conference schedule allows you to do, is it sort of allows you to settle in, where in the past, man, you had so many test after test, especially once you got to this time of the year when you would go out to whatever holiday tournament, and that really starts what would be a stretch of incredibly tough games for Carolina. They have that stretch coming up where they're going to have to take on Michigan State, then Kentucky, and eventually go and face Ohio State. But I mean, look, Carolina, I think right now, there's still a little bit of a runway for them to be able to work themselves up to a team that can shoot the ball a little bit better. But during this stretch here where you now face NC Central, then you face Navy, that's where you've got to sort of get yourself going. So I'm looking for some of these guys to step up, hopefully a little bit more efficiency out of Luka after that second half. Maybe that really is what sparked him. And maybe some of these other guys will be able to feed off of him and knock down shots. But the good news is that even though they haven't been overly efficient out of the gate to start the year, the one half where they needed to be efficient from beyond the arc, they were. So they've shown us that they have that ability. Now it's just being able to do that consistently throughout a game.
You mentioned Jaron Stevenson. I did want to highlight him really quickly. Maybe the unsung hero last night for Carolina. 15 points, just 2 of 6 shooting, but was 10 of 12 from the foul line with 7 boards in 25 minutes. And when he went down with that ankle injury, we were all kind of holding our breath and somewhat concerned, but he comes back and he really bounded his tail off. I talked so much in the summer about if you identify a role for him and he buys into that role, he could be a real difference maker for Carolina. He's been the best player in the first 3 games we haven't talked enough about. Mm-hmm. And that's just the reality of what his role is he's going to do a bunch of stuff that impacts winning that it's not going to be sexy for us to talk about. But the good news is he's willing to do that. And that really, I think, is a sign of, first off, how unselfish he is, but really the culture that Hubert Davis has built with this year's roster, where he's been able to identify these roles, get these guys to buy into those roles, and those guys are going out on a night-in, night-out basis here early on, and they're doing what they're being asked to do to help the team, and that needs to be shouted out because that was certainly not the case with what happened a year ago. Let's now get to our discussion topic. We're running long here. But a fun night talking about a big win over the Radford Highlanders. Of course, if you've been listening to the show for quite some time, I kind of have a routine of whenever the game is over, I put the Tar Heel Sports Network on, and I go and listen to Jones talk with Hubert Davis. Last night he had Tyler Zeller with him on the call. Listen to those guys kind of break down the game while I begin writing the article, getting the podcast ready, so on and so forth. And one thing that Jones brought up both to Hubert and then to even Tyler Zeller was the bench. And maybe just, can Carolina get more from it? They did get 21 points from their bench last night with Jonathan Powell scoring 8. But one thing, Jones felt like from, broadcasting the game was that there was a noticeable, I guess, dip in the level of play, level of execution. And you will say, well, doesn't that happen? That's why starters are starters and bench guys are bench guys. I don't know how much of that would be a conversation if Luka Bogava was coming off the bench or if Jaron Stevenson was coming off the bench. Is that something that we should be concerned about over the next 6-7 weeks, is understanding that these guys can come off the bench and still impact the game, but there might be a noticeable dip in execution, intensity, so on and so forth, as opposed to when that starting 5 is on the floor?
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly could be a drop-off in execution in terms of energy coming onto the floor and in terms of just, wanting to do the right thing while you're out there. I think Jonathan Powell brings that. I think he's a guy that has some energy to his game. I like the way that he defends. I think that certainly is something that's very encouraging about his game. It's just, I don't know if he's going to be able to execute at a high enough level for Carolina. And I think the thing that people have to sort of figure out, and we've got to even figure it out on our side, is what are the expectations for him? Are you looking for him to be a guy that's averaging 12, 14 points a game for Carolina? Like, I just don't know, because I think what you got from him last night, if you could get that in most of the games, you would feel pretty good about his contributions. I mean, he's a guy that's going to be able to hold up defensively. We knew that from his time at West Virginia, and he's going to shoot the 3 ball well. I think he's done a really good job. He did it against Kansas. He did it against Radford, where he was driving the basket, but he just wasn't necessarily finishing inside. He's got to clean that up just a little bit. But if he does, then I think he's going to be an effective enough player off the bench to really carry this group, because outside of him, I don't know that you're getting much. Look, Derek Dixon is contributing. The fact that he's given you 7 points already, I think, is a really good sign. And I think there is a ton of potential for him. But ideally, you would hope that he doesn't have to play nearly as much as he had to play last night, because in that situation, it's very rare that you're going to put him and Kyan Evans on the floor together. I don't see those two playing a lot together because I think honestly their skill sets are relatively similar. So I think, you're going to see him in a limited capacity. How much of an effect is he really going to be able to have? The one that's shocking to me, and maybe the thing is that Henry Vasar, we just have to buy into the fact that he is going to play 35 minutes per game this year for Carolina. That's going to be his role, and he is ready to handle that role. But it's hard to feel like that when you go from playing 20 minutes a game to playing 35 minutes a game. We're worried about, there's going to be a little bit of a wear down factor, and you are getting nothing from Zayden High. Offensively, you're getting zero. I mean, he has given you absolutely nothing. He hit a key basket in the game against Kansas, but other than that, he hasn't really given you much. And then James Brown, I mean, yeah, there's been times where, he's gotten onto the floor here last night. He gets onto the floor, scores 4 points for Carolina. But his biggest issue was he couldn't defend without fouling. That was one of the main guys that couldn't defend without fouling. So I do think that it makes a little bit of sense why you are concerned about the bench, because you don't have that fire starter that's coming off the bench, the guy that's just going to light it up when he comes into the game. And maybe that was going to be Luka Bogava. The thing is that the first 2 games that we saw him coming off the bench, he wasn't necessarily that guy. So I don't know if that's necessarily what Carolina is going to have this year with these guys off the bench, unless maybe Jaren Stevenson goes to the bench. But that's really tough, man. You're going to put that guy on the bench the way he's defending. That's a hard sell to me, because right now, the way that he's playing, I don't think you can take that guy out of the starting lineup. So we'll have to see when Seth Trimble ultimately comes back. But for the time being, I mean, I'm a little bit concerned about this bench unit, but I do think that you do have someone that I do like in Jonathan Powell. I think he's shown you through the first few games that he does bring that effort on the defensive end of the floor. He does have the ability to knock down shots from the outside, and he's doing what he needs to do when he drives to the basket. It's now just about finishing. So I like his game. It's just about him being a little more consistent.
Yeah, I think best case scenario, when Trimble comes back, Luka is your 6th man, and Luka comes off the bench. Because if Jaren Stevenson is going to continue to do what he's doing, I don't know how you punish him by making him come off the bench. Now, if he's unselfish the way that we think he is, he probably would not matter. But I just like having that force in that starting lineup. There's also a scenario, he's going to be Carolina's backup 5-man. And that could be when Carolina throws out a smaller lineup where they're really running some 5-out action and they're really trying to spread the floor against opponents. Just because, I mean, Zayden High, we gave you 6 rebounds last night. He's not ready to contribute. James Brown, I think, is still probably, unfortunately, a year away. And Matt Lukovic hasn't even seen the court yet. So that's not a guy that, yeah. So I do think that's something that Carolina's got to try to find. And that needs to be something they need to start tinkering with, is putting Stevenson, I think, at that 5 spot with some small ball lineups, because that might be the best way you get to, give Henry Vasar some legitimate rest while also not really sacrificing anything on either end of the floor. All right, let's hand out our game balls before we touch on one closing note. I went with Henry Vasar for my game ball. As I mentioned, 18.7 rebounds, 5 of 7 from the field, 7 of 11 from the foul line, played 19 minutes in the first half, was a steadying force on both ends of the floor for Carolina. And I think, he's done enough in the first 2 games to be a guy that was worthy of receiving the game ball. But, with what Caleb Wilson and other guys have done, that hasn't been the case. But he gets my game ball last night for his efforts in the win over Radford.
Yeah, this one's tough, man, because you have a guy that has a double-double in this game in Caleb Wilson. His first double-double, he scores 13 points, was really good in the second half, even though, he only scored 9 points. I know for him that seems a little bit low. I think he definitely deserves a shout-out, but I got to give it to Luka Bogava in this one. I mean, coming off the bench in the first 2 games of the season. And then they're basically like, look, man, we got to put you into the starting lineup. We've got no choice. Let's see what you can do out there. He scores 19 points, 7 of 18 from the field, 3 of 11 from beyond the arc, 2 of 4 from the foul line. But he had 3 rebounds out of him, 5 assists. He has 2 steals and was a plus 26 for Carolina when he was on the floor. Most importantly, in that second half, he was the guy for Carolina. 12 points on 5 of 10 shooting, 2 of 5 from beyond the arc. So when you needed him to play big for you, to be able to extend that lead out, he was able to. So credit to Luka Bogava. He deserves a game ball for his performance in this game against Radford.
One closing note, 5-star combo guard Dylan Mingo, who was supposed to be on campus last weekend, had to cancel his visit because of flight issues. He will be on campus this weekend visiting Chapel Hill. Unfortunately, was not able to be there for the Kansas game and see Carolina basketball at the fullest experience in the non-conference. But it's a good sign that he still rescheduled his visit, and he'll be on campus this weekend. A big target for Carolina as they're still looking to secure their first commitment in the 2026 recruiting class. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Four Corners Podcast, guys. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where coverage of the Radford game can be found. Go and read my more in-depth recap from Carolina's win over the Highlanders, and I'll be getting you ready for the game against North Carolina Central on Friday night. It's a late tip, 9 p.m. tip. I'll have a preview with for on the day of. Recap will come the day after. Anthony's keeping you up to date, all things Carolina football. Big Bill Belichick press conference earlier this week where he had to address rumors about being interested in the Giants opening in the National Football League. Anthony has you covered on that front. Some recruiting news as well as some tight ends continue to decommit from the program in future recruiting cycles. All that coverage can be found leading up to the game this week against Wake Forest, which will have a game preview and availability report if there's one worth writing about. Then, of course, the recap will come after that game on Saturday against the Demon Deacons. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the season. If you consume the podcast digitally, the best way to keep up with us is like and follow us on Facebook at Heel Tough Blog, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. When we go live, you'll get a notification to either 3 of those platforms, and you can jump right in and be a part of our Carolina basketball conversation. With that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.